when I think legitimate combat sports, the first names that come to mind aren't Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff.
Russo'sBrand.com, where the pros are the pros.
I'm going to read this from the Associated Press. Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff have announced the formation of Real American Freestyle Wrestling League. So this started with Oklahoma State's Wyatt Hendrickson beating Minnesota's Gable Stevenson in Tokyo. After the match, Hendrickson saluted President Donald Trump after his victory last month in Philadelphia. Then, with the United States flag draped over his shoulders, the Air Force second lieutenant walked over and shook Trump's hand and hugged him. Hendrickson's dramatic win in the moments that followed vaulted wrestling into the mainstream and made the timing perfect for Hogan to help launch Real American Freestyle. He will be the commissioner of this league, Hogan, and he wants the league to provide more earnings opportunities for a sport that historically has lacked them. And after Hendrickson's big moment, he feels the time is now. When I saw that happen and I saw our president hug him, I went, okay, we are on point. We're ready to go. And instincts have prevailed, and I smell victory, Hogan said. I think we're on the right track, brother. Hogan initially was a bit, brother's in the quote in the.
We're on the right track, brother.
Yeah. Hogan initially was a bit worried that the freestyle wrestlers might not have the personality to sell tickets. He changed his mind as he began to connect with them. Dude, they've all got that edge. These kids are young, they're smart, they're watching TV, they know about branding, they know what sells, and they've all got that little Conor McGregor swag. The idea was so exciting that I get a chance to be involved with all these young people and help guide them in any way, especially to make them huge stars and create a future for them. People might be surprised, but wrestling is wrestling, brother. Eric Bischoff will be the chief media officer. Eric jumped in with both feet, and he's doing a lot to guide this ship right now, brother, Hogan said. He's setting so much stuff up production-wise, just moving us forward light years ahead of where we could have been on our own.
I believe that, yeah.
Israel Martinez is the chief operating officer. He's an accomplished wrestler.
Is that the third man?
That's the third man.
Okay.
So those that don't know, that Bischoff and Hogan had put out an NWO style video that they're back and that there was going to be a third man. So the third man is Israel Martinez. He's the COO. He's an accomplished wrestling coach who had helped build champions in UFC. He was the wrestling coach for John Jones, and he coached Holly Holm when she upset Ronda Rousey. Hogan said Martinez played a key role in getting USA Wrestling's blessing. So he's the connection, it seems like, there.
To the amateur affiliation, yeah.
Hogan considers the new league an alternative to pro wrestling. I see this as an opportunity for me to get involved, to get back, quit sitting on the couch, to get involved with a bunch of powerful athletes that I can relate to as far as championship material, guys that are on top of their game, and I just couldn't pass on it.
Is this, Al, are we talking about collegiate wrestling?
From what I understand, yeah. I don't think it's a hybrid. I don't think it's similar to years ago, prior to UFC and prior to Punkris and all of these other companies. There was a company called UWFI in Japan. They were really the kind of the pioneers of doing kind of this hybrid. They called it shoot wrestling at the time. It was like a hybrid of professional wrestling. It was still a work, all right, in the sense that they knew who was going to win and who was going to lose before they went to the ring. That's the work. They chose, though, there were a lot of big name guys for the companies that left those respective companies, and we're like, we're not doing this fake stuff anymore. We're going to do real, which the gimmick was. They were going to be legit. They were going to they weren't going to pre-plan, which they did, these matches. And so the only difference was they didn't shoot each other in the ropes anymore. They only did knockout and submission that you could win. And when they kicked you, I mean, if it was anywhere in the body, they kicked you. And if they kicked you around the head, they were supposed to govern it and pull it a little bit. They still laid it in. They could do no closed hand strikes. They were all had to be open hand strikes. And then, of course, once they put you in holds on the mat, nobody could tell what they were, how much pressure they were applying. So that was all totally a work at those times. But when you were standing, then the striking was 70 to 90% real.
So what happened to this promotion?
It was immensely successful. They did amazing gates, drew a ton of money. And then it started to fade over time because a lot of the big name guys started to leave the company, and it finally fell off. But that was all a precursor to UFC and, all these other companies like Pancras and others that started to kind of move in and take over. But
so can this be recreated in your mind?
I think it can be recreated. I know that Josh Barnett's trying to do it with, that company Bloodsport, but it doesn't catch on here in the United States. That like Josh Barnett's Bloodsport hasn't caught on because it's a different culture, and what made it UWFI work, which is a lot of what made it the NWO work, was just timing. At that point in time in the 90s, in the early-ish to mid 90s, there were a lot of people in Japan that were still unaware that wrestling was a work. It was still very, very protected. So for like, say, for instance, like in the case of NWO, the timing which couldn't have been more perfect, of Nash and Hall leaving, and, the general audience, because of the internet access not being nearly what it is now, they really bought and believed, well, hey, these guys are coming in. They still work for WWF at the time, and that's kind of what really triggered all of that. Well, these, major stars kind of saying, hey, we're not doing this anymore. We're going to do real wrestling, kind of helped catapult it in that, it was a shoot that these guys, and they did it. They made it a point to get a lot of wrestlers who had, especially foreign wrestlers, gaijins, that had credentials in amateur wrestling, high level, like Dan Severin. And when Dan and I first started working together and I trained Dan to be a professional wrestler, I knew Dan could go there and could make a living and could potentially be a really big star there, because, Gary Albright already was at that time, because it helped give substance to and credentials to the rest of the company, that these guys were going to be a part of it, that were so awarded within amateur wrestling. So it did work. What it sounds like, I don't know if the timing is there now, number one. Number two, when I think legitimate combat sports, the first names that come to mind aren't Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff. Yeah. So I don't know if, honestly, I think Hogan's association will open up probably some media doors that otherwise it would not open. But I don't think it's going to help to convince a general audience that this is legit, that this is actual competition. And to be quite honest, I hate to say it, but if they're smart, I wouldn't let it be actual real competition. I would sell that as the gimmick
and work it.
I think
they will. I
would work the matches.
I think they're gonna. I think that's what they're gonna do.
I don't know how you can't. That's the reason why even 100, literally over 100. Think about that. Professional wrestling in the United States started back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. It's now 2025. So professional wrestling has been a part of American culture for 125 years, more than a century that we've had this. Okay. Think about that. An entertainment form for more than a century to draw an audience. And a large part of why it was moved into, a work was because it wasn't drawing audiences, for one simple fact. Once they got down on the ground and they just kind of laid there and struggled, nobody could relate to it. It wasn't exciting, and a lot of the matches back then went on for very lengthy amounts of time and people lost interest. So it wasn't drawing an audience. So they had to make it into a work, meaning to convince an audience they were still attempting to win, but to shorten things up, make them more exciting, more interesting, and relatable. Kind of like UFC. UFC literally altered their rules, if you notice, to where they forced the competitors to be in more of a stand-up situation. because general audiences can relate to the striking much more than they can to when they get down on the mat and are tied up and looking for submissions.
Yeah, that's funny, Al, because many years ago, I tried watching UFC. That's the exact reason I stopped watching. They were laying on top of each other on the mat for minutes. And I'm like, are you freaking kidding me?
Yeah. And that's, if you notice that they have the rule, if guys go to the mat and nothing, nothing occurs within a certain amount of time, they break it and they put them back up on their feet.
Yeah.
That's why, it's to keep the match moving, to keep people relating to what's happening physically in the ring. And it just goes to prove, like, they're going to try to, sell this as if it's a shoot and then it's real wrestling, but if they're smart, it'll be a work. Got to then instruct the amateur wrestlers on how, and that's tough. Sometimes that's why a lot of amateur wrestlers, it's hard for them to make the transition because they're in that, their instinct is to win, in their footwork, their timing, their distance, all geared to just gaining that advantage and winning. You've got to now govern or regulate that guy mentally, instinctually, against years of practice and training to now, hey, we're not, we're going to convince you of our intent. We're just not going to have that intent.
Yeah.
And that's a big difference.
I just I love wrestlers and people in the wrestling business with other people's money, man.
Oh, well, that's the best. You know what they say, if you want to be a millionaire, start out as a billionaire and then open up a wrestling company.